said the dead came back that winter. The stories began in whispers, carried across the wind that swept through the plains of Nebraska in 1887, sharp, dry, and restless. There was a farmhouse standing alone beyond the river bend, small against the endless white horizon. At night, a thin column of light could be seen flickering through its attic window, long after the rest of the town had gone to sleep. Some said the family who lived there were searching for a cure. Others claimed they had already found one. The family had no name that endured. Time erased it. What survived were fragments, notes in county ledgers, the scrawl of a traveling preacher, a few yellowed newspaper clippings that spoke of unorthodox practices and unnatural events. No charges were ever filed. No graves were marked. Yet every few decades, when the ground thawed near that stretch of land, something strange surfaced. Small bones, medical tools, a child's shoe. The official records spoke of illness, not miracles. The winter of '87 had been cruel. A fever swept through the Great Plains, killing livestock, infants, and even the strongest men. Doctors were scarce and medicine arrived too late. Most families buried their dead quickly before the frost sealed the earth. But this family, whoever they were, refused to bury theirs. Neighbors remembered the wife as quiet, always with her sleeves rolled high, her hands raw from washing linen in cold water. Her husband, a former field surgeon from the war, rarely spoke. The children were pale, polite, and kept to themselves. They were seen in church some Sundays, but never during communion. And when the fever came for them, one by one, the house on the hill did not hang black cloth over its doors as others did. Instead, the windows glowed brighter. It began with the eldest son. The neighbors recalled the sound of hammering long after midnight, the smell of something sharp, like alcohol or burnt sugar, carried by the wind. The doctor from the next town refused to visit after being summoned once. He rode away before dawn, white as chalk, his medical bag left behind on the porch. He would later tell a sheriff, "There are things that should not breathe twice." But the strangest account came from a mail carrier who claimed to have seen the boy alive weeks later. He described a thin child standing near the barn, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the snow. He looked awake, the man said, but not entirely there, like someone listening to something I couldn't hear. By spring, the rumors had taken form. The family was said to be keeping their dead in the cellar, preserving them, studying them, waiting for the moment breath returned. Some townsfolk said they had seen light moving beneath the cracks of the barn floor and heard the low hum of machinery, though no one owned a generator that far from town. Others spoke of strange deliveries, crates of salt, glass jars, and blocks of ice carted in from the frozen river, and yet, no proof ever surfaced. When a group of men finally gathered enough courage to visit, they found the house empty. The fireplace was still warm. On the table lay a series of notebooks filled with sketches, lungs, veins, cross-sections of eyes, each marked with dates and temperature readings. There was no sign of bodies, only the faint smell of camphor and something sweet, like spoiled fruit. In the cellar, they found shallow beds dug into the earth, lined with cloth and straw. On one wall, someone had written a phrase in chalk: "The body sleeps. The current waits." The notebooks were turned over to the local authorities, but nothing came of it. The sheriff declared it the work of grief and left it at that. The story might have died there, if not for the fact that weeks later, 3 separate farmers claimed to have seen figures walking through the fields at dusk, thin shapes moving against the wind. Slow but steady, like people just learning to walk again. None of them dared to follow. By summer, the house collapsed in a storm. Lightning struck the roof and set the wood ablaze. When it burned quietly. There was no explosion, no screams, only the hiss of rain against ash. The neighbors gathered at a distance, watching the smoke twist upward. When the fire was gone, all that remained was the iron frame of a bed and a row of glass jars melted into the soil. Years later, the land changed hands. A new family built their home there, though they complained of strange flickers in their oil lamps and whispers beneath the floorboards when the wind turned north. One child fell ill and woke 3 days later without memory of the fever, claiming he had dreamed of the family downstairs, still waiting for the light. Historians have long debated what truly happened that winter. Some believe the surgeon father had experimented with early forms of resuscitation, galvanic current, chemical stimulation, crude preservation. It was an age of curiosity when science and faith still tangled in the same desperate hope. That death might be temporary, if only one could find the switch to turn life back on. Others say it was simply grief. A family unable to let go, performing rituals of denial until the line between love and delusion blurred completely. Whatever the truth, the legend endured. Not because it was spectacular, but because it was quiet. Some nights, under the Nebraska sky, the wind still carries the faint hum of something mechanical. Old farmers swear it comes from the earth itself, a vibration too low to hear but deep enough to feel. They say it sounds almost like breathing, and when they tell this story, they lower their voices. Because in that part of Nebraska, the dead have a habit of standing up twice. In the late 19th century, Nebraska was a place suspended between progress and wilderness. The railroad had cut through its center by then, carrying whispers of the modern age, steel, medicine, industry. But beyond the tracks lay miles of silence. The prairie stretched without interruption, broken only by fences, windmills, and the faint lines of smoke from scattered homesteads. For most families, life was an act of endurance. Winter was not just a season, but a test of faith. In 1887, the year the story begins, that faith was fragile. The weather that year was unforgiving. Newspapers recorded snow so deep it buried fences, and winds that tore through barns like blades. Crops had failed the previous season. Cattle froze in the fields. And as if the land itself were not cruel enough, a fever began spreading through the settlements, an unnamed sickness that struck fast and took quietly. Doctors called it the sleeping death. It began with a chill, a shiver that no fire could warm, followed by days of slow breath and eyes that half opened but did not see. In towns where physicians were scarce, a person might appear dead long before their heart stopped. There were reports, rare but haunting, of people buried alive, their bodies found turned in their coffins when the ground thawed. It was not superstition that fed these fears. It was the limits of medicine. At that time, rural medicine was a fragile science balanced on guesswork. Nebraska's physicians worked with few instruments, no stethoscopes that could detect faint heartbeats, no understanding of coma or hypothermia. Pneumonia, tuberculosis, typhoid, all could mimic death in their final stages. In small towns without morgues, a body was often buried within hours to prevent decay or spread of infection. Families prayed, priests blessed, and earth closed over the uncertainty. But not everyone could accept that silence as final. In the 1880s, the frontier was filled with men who had learned medicine during the Civil War, field surgeons accustomed to miracles of chance. They had seen soldiers wake from wounds that should have killed them, men declared dead rise after days of unconsciousness. These doctors carried both skill and trauma, and when they returned to civilian life, they brought a dangerous kind of hope, the belief that death might sometimes be reversed. The newspapers fed that hope. Across America, articles appeared describing modern resurrections. One story out of Ohio told of a woman revived by electric shock. Another from Illinois claimed a boy had woken in his coffin after lightning struck the ground above him. It was the dawn of what scientists called galvanism, the study of reanimating muscle and nerve with electricity. In laboratories, frogs' legs twitched on command. In theaters, experimenters shocked corpses before wide-eyed crowds. It was both science and spectacle, a promise that the soul could be called back if the method was right. In Nebraska, that kind of knowledge reached the frontier slowly, half understood and wrapped in rumor. For families who had lost everything to illness, even fragments of that science could ignite dangerous hope. The people who lived near the Platte River were practical, God-fearing settlers, but they were also haunted by isolation. Churches were far apart, doctors even farther. When illness came, they turned inward, to prayer, to home remedies, to whatever knowledge one person might carry from the world beyond. In such places, belief and experiment easily intertwined. A man who had once been a surgeon might be both healer and heretic. It was common in that era for families to keep the bodies of the dead inside their homes through the night, partly out of love, partly out of fear that they might not be dead at all. Some laid mirrors on the chest to catch breath. Others placed feathers near the lips to detect movement. A few even kept their loved ones on ice for days, watching for signs of warmth. The line between care and obsession was thin. When the fever of 1887 struck, the practice intensified. The cold slowed decay, and so the illusion of life lingered longer. Families began to believe that if a person's body remained intact, their spirit might still be nearby, waiting for the right touch, the right warmth, the right prayer. It was in this setting that the story of the unnamed family took root. They were not the only ones to lose their children that year, but they were the only ones who refused to let the loss harden into silence. The father, it was said, had served as a medic during the war, where he had witnessed men return from near death after exposure to cold. He believed, perhaps with reason, that the body could mimic death without surrendering to it. He kept his own notes, measurements of temperature, descriptions of breathing patterns, sketches of blood flow. To him, death was not an ending, but an equation yet to be solved. The neighbors, of course, saw something else. A house where smoke rose at odd hours, where light flickered from the basement when the rest of the plain was dark. Children who should have been buried were said to still be lying under blankets. Some nights a faint hum was heard, mechanical, rhythmic, like a heartbeat built of metal. In the wider world, such whispers might have been dismissed. But in a community that measured its faith in silence, every strange sound became a story. People began to speak of the family that raised the dead. The name spread quietly from one town to another until even the traveling merchants repeated it. By then, spiritualism had already taken root across America. Seances were held in drawing rooms, and mediums promised to bridge the divide between the living and the lost. Newspapers printed reports of photographs showing faint human shapes beside the living. The idea that the dead might return was no longer heresy. It was entertainment. Yet what happened in that Nebraska farmhouse was different. There were no spirits summoned, no seances performed. If the family believed in resurrection, it was a physical one that required tools and patience, not prayer. Historians later tried to piece together the family's origins through fragments: a property deed, a set of letters to a medical supply house in Chicago, receipts for ether and galvanic wire. Some even argued that the father might have been connected to the new movement of resuscitation research, spreading quietly through medical journals. Others saw him simply as a desperate man, performing the only experiment that mattered, the attempt to outwait grief. The world of 1887 was caught between two kinds of faith, the old and the new. On one side stood religion, promising eternal life beyond the grave. On the other stood science, hinting that life could be extended without leaving it. Between them was the prairie, vast and silent, where families buried their dead with one eye still on the door. It was a landscape shaped by isolation, where human understanding of death was both intimate and uncertain. People lived close to their dead, sometimes too close. Graves were shallow, coffins handmade, and mourning customs blurred into superstition. Women kept locks of hair as charms. Men marked trees with initials of those lost, believing it tethered their spirits to home. In such a place, it is not difficult to imagine a man who could not let go. A man who heard stories of electric revival, who saw the thin boundary between warmth and stillness, and thought, perhaps the soul lingers if given time, and if that belief cost him his sanity, it also made him something else, a symbol of an age that could not decide whether to bow to God or challenge him. By the time the century turned, Nebraska's towns had grown. Railroads multiplied, telegraph lines cut through the emptiness, and medicine advanced beyond guesswork. The fever that once terrified the plains became a footnote in medical journals. But in the local folklore of the region, the story of that family endured, retold around campfires, whispered by travelers, always with the same ending, a light that never went out, and beneath it, the sound of something that should not have been breathing. The first death came in early January, when the cold had already buried the land under white silence. According to what little was ever written, the youngest child had fallen ill without warning. A mild fever, a cough, and then a stillness that spread through the small farmhouse like frost through glass. The family, father, mother, and two remaining children, sat through the night, watching the rise and fall of the small chest until it stopped. They did what every frontier family did. They waited. The priest could not come through the snow. The doctor's horse had gone lame on the frozen road. So they laid the child on a table by the window, lit a lamp, and sat beside it. Morning came, then another night, and the body did not change. No decay, no color leaving the face, only a coldness that felt too clean to be final. On the third night, the father leaned close and swore he heard something, soft beneath the layers of blankets. A breath, faint as dust. He placed his ear to the child's chest, and though no heartbeat came, he could not pull away. He told his wife to bring water, then fire, then cloth. He did not say what he intended, only that she should trust him. He had seen this once before, he said, years ago in the war. Men frozen stiff, their skin blue and their eyes dull, yet alive when thawed. He believed the cold had trapped the life inside rather than taken it away. That night, the sound of boiling water mixed with whispered prayers. Steam rose from the table as the father pressed warm cloths to the child's skin, turning it pink again. He whispered the child's name over and over, not in grief but command. Hours passed and the silence thickened. When dawn came, nothing had changed, except the father's certainty he would not bury the child. When neighbors came with shovels, they found the door locked. The mother met them through the window, her eyes hollow, her breath fogging the glass. She said the ground was too hard to dig, and they believed her. They left, uneasy but respectful. Everyone had their own way of mourning. But weeks passed, and the family did not emerge. Smoke still rose from the chimney. Lights burned at odd hours. The neighbors began to whisper that the family was keeping the dead child inside. By February, those whispers reached the nearest town. The local doctor, a man trained more in superstition than science, rode out to see for himself. He found the farmhouse dark except for the cellar, where the father had built something strange. There, in the damp half-light, stood a table covered with cloth, copper wires trailing from its corners. A small device, half battery, half clockwork, ticked beside it. On the table lay the child, eyes closed, skin pale but untouched by decay. The doctor, shaking, told the father he was violating the laws of both God and nature. The father disagreed. He spoke quietly, almost tenderly, as if afraid of waking someone. He explained that he had read of a new discovery. Electricity could move the muscles of the dead, restore breath to those mistaken for gone. The journals said so. He was only following what science promised, that death might be reversible if caught soon enough. The doctor refused to stay. When he returned to town, he told no one what he had seen, perhaps out of fear of ridicule, perhaps out of guilt. But in March the fever came again, this time for the mother. She lasted longer, days of delirium, the same slow decline. When her breathing stopped, the father repeated his ritual. He bathed her in warm water, adjusted the wires, and turned the small crank on his machine. The sound filled the room, low, rhythmic, like a heartbeat forced through metal. Sparks lit her skin, and for a moment, her hand twitched. He took that as proof. The next morning, the curtains were drawn. The two surviving children were seen outside only once, fetching water, their faces pale and blank. A traveler passing through said the farmhouse reeked of ozone, like after a storm. By April, the story had spread to the towns along the Platte. Some said the man had gone mad with grief, others that he had built a laboratory beneath his house. A few believed he had succeeded, that he had found a way to keep the dead from leaving. When spring thawed the earth, a group of men from the nearest settlement decided to confront him. They approached at dusk, when the sky burned orange and the fields shimmered with meltwater. From the distance they heard a low hum, steady, pulsing. As they neared the door, the sound grew louder, and one of them swore he heard breathing from beneath the floor. The father met them at the door. His face was drawn, his eyes bright with sleeplessness. He said his family was resting and would not be disturbed. When they tried to push past him, he raised a gun, not with anger but with desperation. The men left. They did not return. Summer came and the prairie bloomed again. The house stood quiet, its windows shuttered. Travelers avoided the road that passed it. At night, some claimed they saw lights flicker under the earth, faint and blue. Others heard soft cries like a child waking from a dream. No one knows what happened in those months. Only that when autumn came and a new settler family moved into the area, the house was found abandoned. Inside, dust lay thick and the air stank faintly of iron. The cellar door was locked from the inside. When they broke it open, the space below was cold. In the center stood the table, wires dangling like vines. 3 shapes rested there, 2 adults, 1 small, perfectly preserved. Their skin was pale but unmarked, their faces calm. Around them, the machinery had stopped, its gears rusted in place. Some said it was the work of science gone too far. Others that it was mercy, that he had found a way to preserve what he could not let go. The bodies were buried quietly, without ceremony, and the house left to rot. But the story remained. Travelers swore that in winter, when the snow lay heavy and the air turned sharp, a faint glow could still be seen beneath the ground, pulsing like a slow, steady breath. In the town records, the event was never fully explained. The doctor who had visited refused to give testimony. The sheriff called it tragedy and sealed the report. But the people who lived nearest the old road whispered a different version, that the family had not died, only waited too long between heartbeats. And on nights when the wind carries across the prairie, you can hear the low hum again, soft, persistent, mechanical, like something remembering how to live. In the weeks that followed her disappearance, the town seemed to hold its breath. Snow still blanketed the fields, but the air carried a kind of waiting, as if everyone sensed that something had ended, though no one could name what. People spoke quietly, always in fragments. The butcher's wife said she had seen candlelight in the chapel again. The schoolmaster dismissed it as imagination born of grief. The pastor, pale and thin from sleepless nights, refused to enter the churchyard alone. The local paper published a short notice. Unidentified woman missing since December 19th, believed lost to the storm. It ran only once, tucked between announcements for farm tools and rail schedules. Yet the story traveled farther than the printed word. Rumor always did. By February, nearby towns had their own versions. Some said she had exhumed her fiancé's body and taken it home. Others that she had drowned herself, clutching her veil. The truth was simpler and sadder. No one ever found her. The clergy reacted first. The parish priest, who had known her family for years, delivered a sermon on the dangers of false communion with the dead. He warned against seances, against mourning that turned into idolatry. His words trembled at the edges, betraying not authority but fear. He had been the one to find the chapel open that night, the wax still warm. Some said he refused to speak of what he saw there, claiming it was not for mortal tongues to repeat. Doctors from neighboring towns offered explanations more suited to the new century. They called it melancholia, a disease of the nerves. One wrote in a private letter, later preserved by his descendants. The case presents classic symptoms of hysteria, prolonged bereavement, and delusional conviction of continued presence. Another suggested catalepsy, an altered state between life and death, brought on by trauma. But none of their words reached the people who had known her. Science could name the sickness, but not the silence it left behind. In that silence, myth took root. Children were told not to wander near the river at dusk. Lovers left tokens at the chapel door for luck, believing her spirit might bless their unions or curse them if forgotten. The boundary between reverence and fear blurred until the two became one. She was spoken of not as a sinner or a saint, but as a warning, a figure who reminded the living that devotion could turn against itself. Some evenings, the town blacksmith would swear he saw her lantern swinging through the fog by the orchard. He would not speak of it in daylight, fearing mockery, yet others admitted the same. A sound like soft fabric brushing stone, a fleeting light, a presence just beyond the edge of sight. Whether real or imagined, it bound the townspeople together in a quiet agreement that whatever had happened was best left undisturbed. The newspapers of New York City heard of the story months later. Long after winter had passed, they printed it under titles like Bride of the Dead and Phantom Wedding on the Hudson. The tone was almost mocking, the kind of sensationalism meant to sell copies to readers hungry for the strange. But even through exaggeration, the unease remained. The idea of a woman refusing to accept death in an age obsessed with progress unsettled people. It suggested that beneath their new inventions and their polished society, something ancient still lingered, the old belief that love could defy decay. Scholars from the city's new medical colleges occasionally referenced the case in lectures on mourning psychosis. They spoke clinically, with the confidence of men who had never felt what they described. To them, the woman was a study, not a soul. They theorized about neural exhaustion, grief-induced hallucination, or mass hysteria infecting the town. Yet none of them ever visited the chapel. None heard the quiet shift of wind through its broken roof, or the way the cold seemed to pause there, as if listening. For the families who lived near her house, the memory became part of the land. Her garden never grew again, no matter how many times new owners planted. The soil stayed damp, as if still thawing from some inner frost. In spring, when fog rose from the river, the house would appear and vanish in its folds. Few stayed long. Renters left without explanation, saying only that the nights were too quiet. The pastor who had delivered that first warning sermon fell ill later that year. In his final confession, he was said to have murmured a single phrase: "The union was blessed." His replacement found the parish records incomplete, several pages torn out, others written over in faint script. What remained were dates and half-phrases, notes of rituals performed without witnesses. One entry read, "Both bodies accounted for, yet one grave unfilled." The town's reaction shifted with time. The first generation treated her story as caution, the next as curiosity. By the turn of the century, when electricity replaced gas lamps and telegraphs gave way to telephones, her legend resurfaced as folklore. Writers collected tales of the corpse bride of New York, alongside accounts of haunted bridges and phantom trains. She became a ghost of paper and ink, her sorrow reduced to entertainment. Yet, curiously, those who lived nearest the old chapel refused to speak her name. There were efforts to restore the chapel once. Around 1890, a team of workers arrived with tools and timber, intending to rebuild its roof. They left before the week was done. In their report to the town council, they wrote that the foundation was unstable. In private letters, two of them described something stranger: tools gone missing, candles relit after being snuffed, and once, a voice that called from beneath the floor, soft, distant, pleading. They refused to return. By then, the world had changed. New York had become a symbol of progress, its skyline climbing higher each year. But in small corners of the state, where fog still clung to the river and the air smelled faintly of iron and damp wood, the old stories remained. The people who kept them alive didn't speak of madness or miracles. They spoke of longing, the kind that outlasts breath. Modern historians would later view the event as a mirror of its age. The 1850s were steeped in contradictions. A society that preached reason, yet lived by superstition, that celebrated love, yet feared its power. The Bride's Act, whatever its truth, was the culmination of that conflict. She stood between belief and denial, between the comfort of ritual and the terror of loss. Psychologists have since written about grief fixation, where mourning becomes identity, where memory consumes the self. But even through the lens of modern understanding, her story resists neat explanation. The facts are sparse, the witnesses unreliable, the evidence warped by fear and time. What remains is a feeling, a chill that lingers in the telling, as if part of her still waits to be understood. And perhaps that is why her story endures. Because everyone in some quiet corner of their heart knows what it means to refuse goodbye. The townspeople who once feared her grew old and died. Their children forgot her name. The chapel fell to ruin, then to dust. But on certain nights when fog rolls down from the river, a faint light still flickers on the hill. Some say it's a reflection from passing trains. Others swear it's a lantern, swaying gently as if carried by a bride still keeping her promise. For months the land lay silent. Grass grew over the old path, and the house stood stripped of its roof, its walls gnawed by wind. To most, it was a ruin, a curiosity at the edge of the prairie. But then, in late autumn, the ground began to heave. It was subtle at first. The new tenant, a widower named Ellis, felt it through the soles of his boots, a faint trembling when he stood near the cellar. He thought it was frost settling in the soil. But each night, as the temperature dropped, the vibration deepened. It seemed to come from below, rhythmic, deliberate. He told himself it was his imagination. Then the lamp began to flicker. One night, he brought a lantern and pried open the old cellar door, the one the sheriff had ordered sealed years before. The hinges moaned as cold air rose, carrying the smell of metal and dust. The beam of light swept over the stone steps, the damp walls, the shape of the table below. Everything was still, and yet the hum was real, low, steady, like a heart buried too deep to die. He descended slowly, each step sinking into soft dirt. The lantern flame stuttered. The air pressed against his ears. He could hear the faint ticking of something unseen. On the table lay the remnants of the machine, the wires, the battery box, the clockwork now rusted into stillness. But beneath it faintly, something pulsed. He reached down, brushing aside dust and cobwebs, and touched the metal plate that connected the wires. It was warm. The sound grew louder then, not through the air, but through the bones. A deep vibration that crawled up his arm, into his jaw, his skull. He dropped the lantern, and in the darkness it flared once before dying. The glow that replaced it came from the floor. A pale blue light seeped through the cracks of the earth. Slow at first, then rising like water under ice. Ellis stumbled back, pressing his hand to the wall. The hum became a rhythm, steady, measured, impossible to mistake. A heartbeat, and then he heard a sound that didn't belong to any machine. A slow inhale, a sigh drawn through dust and time. He froze. There were shapes in the light now, indistinct, fluid. 3 of them standing close together, their outlines trembling like smoke. 1 small, 2 tall. They were not moving forward. They were only there, suspended in the air's thick shimmer, as if waiting for something. He wanted to flee, but his legs would not obey. The hum wrapped around him, a current without mercy. The air itself seemed to breathe in rhythm, pulling him closer to the table. His fingers brushed the wood, and for a moment the light dimmed, then flared. He saw faces then, just for an instant. Calm, unbroken, the same as the day they had been buried. The father's eyes were open, watching him. Not pleading, not angry, only aware. The child's lips parted as though to speak, and the mother's hand rested gently on the table, reaching toward the wires. Ellis stumbled back, tearing himself from the vision. The hum faltered, turned into a faint crackle, and then silence. The light faded to nothing. When he finally climbed the stairs, gasping into the night, the wind had died. The stars above seemed frozen. He never told anyone exactly what he saw, only that the cellar was wrong, that it was alive in a way no place should be. He boarded the door shut again and left within a week. Months later, a team from Omaha University came to examine the property after reading an old report about the cryogenic family. They brought instruments, notebooks, a generator. When they broke open the cellar, they found no bodies, no table, only the imprint of something heavy pressed into the earth. The air was colder there, unnaturally so, as if the frost never left. They noted the readings and left quickly. None of their data was ever published, but after that visit, the stories returned. Locals said the lights were seen again, small, flickering deep under the soil. Cattle avoided the field. Travelers reported losing time near the old house, their watches slowing, their lamps dimming. One man claimed he heard children laughing under the wind, a sound that came and went with the seasons. By 1890, the farmhouse was gone, burned by accident, the official record said. No one could agree on how. Some said lightning struck it during a storm. Others whispered that it burned from within, that the hum grew until it became a roar, shaking the earth, and the land itself sealed it away. What survived were only the journals of a deputy named Clark, who'd visited the site just before it was destroyed. His notes were sparse but vivid. He wrote that he'd found strange impressions in the soil, as if something beneath had breathed against it. He described hearing a faint thumping that matched his heartbeat, though the ground was frozen solid. His final line read simply, "It wasn't dead, it was waiting." The report was filed, stamped, and forgotten. Clark left the county soon after, and no one knew where he went. Yet the land remembers. The families who came later, long after the story had faded into rumor, spoke of crops that grew in strange patterns, circles of earth that never froze, even in the coldest winters. At night, they said the fields would flicker faintly, as if lit from below. Those who dug there said they struck metal deep down, a lattice of wires too old to be part of any machine, too deliberate to be natural. When they tried to pull it up, it hummed. They covered it again. For the rest of his life, the last surviving witness, Ellis, refused to speak of that night. But sometimes, when asked about the strange light on his land, he'd answer softly. They weren't trying to defy God. They were trying to remember how to live. And every few years, when the snow fell just right, the field would glow again, soft blue, steady, beating against the night like a memory that refused to fade. No one ever proved what happened in that cellar. No one ever could, because by the time science learned how to bring back the dead, the prairie had already done it once and buried the secret beneath its frost. Decades passed and Nebraska changed. The open plains were crossed by steel tracks and telephone wires. The ghost towns folded into the dust of progress. The old homestead no longer stood. The land where it had been was flattened into wheat fields, plowed smooth by generations who no longer knew what their plows unearthed. Yet sometimes, when farmers turned the soil after a hard winter, they found pieces of copper, blackened and brittle, or fragments of glass that glimmered faintly blue beneath the sunlight. Most tossed them aside. A few kept them, uncertain why. The story of the family that raised the dead lived on only in fragments, in fading newspaper clippings, in a few lines scrawled in the margin of a medical journal, in letters tucked away in church archives. Historians treated it as folklore, one of many frontier myths born from isolation and fear. The official record said nothing of machines or lights, only that a family perished of illness and the land reclaimed what remained. But for those who lived near the river, the air still carried something that made the skin prickle and the breath pause. By the early 20th century, science had caught up to what the father might have dreamed of. Defibrillators, refrigeration, blood transfusion. Each invention brought the dead closer to the living, blurring the boundary he had once dared to cross. What had been madness in 1887 was now medicine. Yet none of it could explain how the bodies in that cellar had resisted decay, or why the earth above them still hummed long after the machine had rusted away. Some said it was coincidence, that the cold and the chemistry of the soil preserved them naturally. Others, more quietly, wondered if grief itself could hold life in suspension, if love and denial could anchor a heartbeat beyond its time. They pointed to the reports of villagers who'd seen the blue glow, to the fact that every attempt to build on that ground had failed. The crops would twist, the roots curl upward, as if pushing against something unseen. In 1931, a researcher from Lincoln visited the site while cataloging unexplained regional phenomena. His notes, never published, described the soil temperature as inexplicably constant, 5 degrees cooler than the surrounding land, even under direct sun. He also recorded a faint vibration detected by his instruments, steady as respiration. His report ended with a question written in pencil: residual energy, or something preserved? He died a year later of pneumonia. The papers vanished with him. The land was eventually purchased by the state for agricultural testing, fenced off and labeled Lot 22B. No one lives there now. But aerial photographs show odd discolorations in the ground, 3 faint ovals aligned in a perfect row, like impressions left by something long buried yet restless. For those who still tell the story, it's no longer about ghosts or miracles. It's about the thinness of the line between life and death, and the people who, through desperation or devotion, dared to press against it. The father's machine was crude, his understanding flawed, yet his motive was purely human. He wanted to undo loss, to stop the silence that steals everything, and perhaps in some way he succeeded, because stories like his never truly end. They linger the way breath fogs glass and fades, but never fully disappears. Each retelling stirs the air again, reminds us that even in an age of certainty, mystery survives. Those who walk the fields at dusk say that the ground still feels warm in places, even after the first frost. Some claim they hear a soft ticking underfoot when the wind dies, a sound that syncs with their pulse until they can no longer tell which is which. No one stays long enough to find out. There are no markers, no headstones, only the endless whisper of grass, bending in the wind like a hand brushing against the earth. But when the clouds part and the moonlight finds the soil, it shines with a faint metallic sheen, as though something beneath still remembers how to glow. In the end, the story of the Nebraska family isn't about resurrection, it's about memory. The machine may have failed, the bodies may have vanished, but the idea refused to die. It passed quietly from generation to generation, reshaped, softened, until it became a parable for what grief can make us believe. And perhaps, in the quiet hours between heartbeat and stillness, there's truth in that belief, that somewhere in the cold soil of the plains, under a sky wide enough to hold every loss and every miracle, something still waits, not alive, not dead, just remembering. And if you stand there long enough, you might hear it too, a low hum, a pulse beneath your feet, the sound of a promise that never stopped trying to keep itself alive.